I never thought I would spend a Tuesday morning arguing with a middle-aged woman named Patricia through my car window about being held prisoner in my own neighborhood, but here we are. The gate at Meadowbrook Commons in Scottsdale, Arizona had been padlocked shut with a chain thick enough to anchor a boat, and Patricia Henderson, our HOA president, was standing on the other side with her arms crossed and a smile that could curdle milk. "This is a safety measure," she announced through the wrought iron bars like some kind of suburban warden. "The board voted last night, and effective immediately, all residents must sign new compliance agreements before being allowed to leave the property." I'm Keith Jameson, a software developer who works from home most days, but today I had a critical meeting downtown with a client who was probably already wondering where the hell I was. My phone showed 8:47 a.m., and I was supposed to be in their office by 9:30. The line of cars behind me stretched back toward the main residential loop, engines idling, and I could see neighbors getting out of their vehicles with expressions ranging from confusion to barely contained rage. "Patricia, you cannot legally keep us here," I said, trying to maintain some semblance of calm. "This is unlawful imprisonment. Open the gate." "It's called an emergency security protocol," she replied, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. She was wearing a white pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and her platinum blonde hair was styled in that aggressive bob that seemed mandatory for HOA board members. "We've had reports of unauthorized vehicles in the community. Until everyone signs the new documentation acknowledging the revised parking rules, speed limit enforcement, and landscaping requirements, nobody leaves." Behind me, I heard a car door slam. Tom Morrison, a retired firefighter who lived 3 houses down from me, walked up beside my Honda. He was a big guy, 6'3", and built like someone who had spent 30 years carrying people out of burning buildings. "Patricia, I'm going to give you exactly one chance to unlock that gate before this becomes a much bigger problem than you're ready for," Tom said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made people listen. "What you're doing right now is false imprisonment, which is a felony in Arizona. You're also creating a fire hazard and blocking emergency egress routes, which violates about 15 different fire codes." Patricia's smile didn't waver. "The board has consulted with our attorney, and we're well within our rights according to the CC&Rs that everyone signed when they purchased their homes. This is private property. CC&Rs don't override state and federal law," I interjected, pulling up my phone. "I'm calling the police right now." "Go ahead," Patricia said, examining her manicured nails. "I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear about all the violations happening in this community. Unauthorized paint colors, unapproved decorative items, vehicles parked in driveways overnight. We have documented everything." I dialed 911 while Tom pulled out his own phone. The operator answered on the second ring, and I explained the situation as calmly as I could manage. She seemed confused at first, making me repeat that we were being held inside our own neighborhood by the HOA president, but she said she would dispatch officers to our location. More neighbors were gathering now. Sarah Chen, who worked as an ER nurse at Phoenix Memorial, was practically shaking with frustration. "I have a shift that starts in 45 minutes, she called out. "People are going to die if I'm not there." "You should have thought about that before you planted those roses without board approval," Patricia replied, without missing a beat. "Actions have consequences, Sarah. The roses in my backyard? The backyard that's completely fenced and that nobody can even see from the street?" Sarah's voice went up an octave. "You're actually insane." Tom had walked the length of the gate, examining the lock and chain. "This is commercial grade," he said, returning to where I stood. "She planned this. This isn't some spur-of-the-moment thing." I looked at the growing crowd. There had to be at least 20 cars now, maybe more. Some people were making 3-point turns and heading back into the neighborhood, probably to try the back gate, but I had a sinking feeling Patricia had thought of that too. My phone buzzed with a text from my client, "Running late, or should we reschedule?" I typed back quickly, "Locked inside my neighborhood by HOA, not joking. Will explain later, need to reschedule." The response came back almost immediately. "What?" A Scottsdale police cruiser pulled up on the outside of the gate about 10 minutes later, and Officer Rodriguez got out, looking between Patricia and the line of cars with evident confusion. He was young, probably mid-20s, and I got the impression he had not covered this scenario in the academy. "Madam, I'm going to need you to unlock this gate," he said to Patricia. She pulled out a folder from her oversized Louis Vuitton bag, the kind of preparedness that sent a chill down my spine. "Officer, this is a private community. The Homeowners Association has the legal authority to enforce its rules and regulations. Every person in those cars signed a contract agreeing to abide by our guidelines." Rodriguez flipped through the papers she handed him, his frown deepening. "Madam, I understand you have HOA rules, but you can't prevent people from leaving. That's false imprisonment." "It's a civil matter," Patricia countered. "Your department doesn't have jurisdiction over civil contract disputes." I could see the officer wavering, probably running through his training and trying to figure out if she was right. Tom stepped up to the gate. "Officer Rodriguez, my name is Tom Morrison. I was with the Phoenix Fire Department for 30 years. What this woman is doing right now is creating a life safety hazard. This community has approximately 200 homes. She has blocked the main egress route, and I'm willing to bet she's blocked the secondary gate as well. If there's a fire, a medical emergency, or any other crisis, emergency vehicles can't get in and residents can't get out. That's a violation of International Fire Code Section 503.1, which requires premises to have approved fire apparatus access roads. It's also a violation of IFC Section 1010.1.9, which prohibits locks or fastening devices that require special knowledge or effort to operate from the egress side." Rodriguez's expression changed. "Is the other gate blocked too?" "I'll bet you my pension it is," Tom said. The officer got back on his radio, and I heard him request another unit to check the north entrance. Within 3 minutes, we had confirmation. Patricia had indeed locked both gates with identical chain and padlock setups. "Madam, I need you to unlock both gates immediately, or I will have to place you under arrest," Rodriguez said, his hand moving to rest on his belt near his handcuffs. Patricia's smile finally cracked. "You can't arrest me for enforcing our community rules. I have 17 people on the board who approved this action. Then I'll arrest all 18 of you if I have to," Rodriguez replied. "But right now, I'm talking to you. Unlock the gates." "I don't have the keys with me," Patricia said, and I knew immediately it was a lie from the way her eyes flicked to the left. "They're in the HOA office." "Then we're going to take a walk to your office," Rodriguez said. "The office is outside the community," Patricia replied, her smile returning. "You'd have to unlock the gate to get me there." It was such a circular piece of logic that I almost admired the audacity. Tom, however, just shook his head and pulled out his phone again. "I'm calling the fire marshal," he said. "Mike Chen owes me a favor from back in the day, and he's going to love this." Tom stepped away, phone to his ear, and I could hear pieces of his conversation. "Yeah, Mike, I'm serious. Full-on lockdown. Both gates. At least 200 homes. Yeah, she's completely lost it. I figured you'd want to handle this personally." While Tom talked, more police cars arrived. Word was spreading on the neighborhood Facebook page and the Nextdoor app, and people who had been inside their homes were coming out to see what was happening. Mrs. Albertson, who had to be pushing 80, was standing by the gate with her walker, tears streaming down her face. "I have a doctor's appointment," she said to anyone who would listen. "I have cancer. I need to get to my appointment." That did it for Officer Rodriguez. "Madam, you're under arrest for false imprisonment and creating a public hazard." He started reading Patricia her rights, but she just laughed. "You'll be hearing from our attorney. The city is going to get sued into oblivion for this. This is harassment of a private organization." As Rodriguez attempted to handcuff her, Patricia went limp, dropping to the ground in what I recognized as the classic passive resistance technique. She wasn't fighting, but she wasn't helping either, and the officer was clearly trying to figure out how to handle a middle-aged woman in a white pantsuit who had suddenly turned into dead weight on the asphalt. A second officer moved to help, and together they managed to get Patricia to her feet and into the back of the cruiser, though she kept up a steady stream of legal threats the entire time. But she was on the other side of the gate, and the locks were still very much locked. Tom came back over, pocketing his phone. "Fire Marshal is on his way with a crew. He's not happy. He's also bringing the fire chief because apparently they want to make an example out of this situation." "How long until they get here?" Sarah asked. She was on her own phone now, presumably with her hospital, explaining why she was going to be late. 20 minutes, maybe less. They're coming from the central station on Miller Road. I leaned against my car, checking my messages. My client had responded with, "Good luck with that. Let me know when you're free," which was gracious under the circumstances, but I was still going to lose this contract. You don't show a first meeting and expect them to wait around. The other residents were getting increasingly agitated. Jerry Patterson, who ran some kind of investment firm downtown, was screaming into his phone about missing the opening bell. The Kowalski family had 3 kids in the back seat who were supposed to be at school. Marcus Webbs, a construction foreman, had a crew waiting on him at a job site in Tempe. "This is going to cost me thousands," Marcus said to nobody in particular. "I've got 12 guys standing around doing nothing, and I'm paying them by the hour." More police had arrived, and they had set up a perimeter on the outside of the gate, probably to keep Patricia from somehow escaping custody, though she was still sitting in the back of the cruiser looking smug despite the handcuffs. A sergeant had taken over the scene, a gray-haired woman named Lopez who looked like she had seen everything twice and was not impressed by any of it. "Has anyone tried cutting the lock?" she asked. "We don't have bolt cutters that will handle that gauge," one of the officers replied. "That's hardened steel, commercial grade. We'd need power tools. Fire department will have what we need," Tom said. "Hydraulic cutters will go through that like butter." Sergeant Lopez nodded and started coordinating with the arriving fire units on the radio. I could hear sirens in the distance getting closer. A news van pulled up and I groaned. Channel 12 had somehow gotten wind of the situation, and a reporter I recognized from the evening news was climbing out with a cameraman in tow. Great. This was going to be all over the local news by noon. The reporter, a woman named Jennifer something, made a beeline for the gate where the most dramatic visuals were happening. She stuck her microphone through the bars toward the gathered residents. "Can you tell us what's happening here?" she asked. About 6 people started talking at once, and she had to pick someone. Her camera operator pointed at Mrs. Albertson, probably because crying elderly cancer patient made for the most sympathetic footage. "The HOA locked us in," Mrs. Albertson said, her voice shaking. "I have a chemotherapy appointment, and they won't let me leave." Jennifer's eyes went wide, and I could practically see the Emmy nomination dancing in her head. "The Homeowners Association locked all the gates? With you inside?" "Both gates," Tom confirmed. "Fire code violations, false imprisonment, the whole 9 yards. Fire Marshal is en route." The camera swung to Tom, and Jennifer lit up even more. "You're a firefighter? Retired. Phoenix FD, 30 years. And I can tell you that what the HOA did here is about as illegal as it gets from a life safety standpoint." I stayed out of camera range, having no desire to be on the news, but I watched as Jennifer worked the crowd, getting sound bites from everyone who wanted to vent. Jerry talked about the financial damage. Sarah discussed the medical emergency implications. Marcus explained how small business owners were being hurt by HOA overreach. Then Jennifer turned her attention to the police cruiser where Patricia sat. She approached Sergeant Lopez first, asking for comment, and Lopez gave the standard "this is an ongoing investigation" response that reporters hate. But Jennifer was persistent. "Can you at least confirm that the HOA president has been arrested?" "A suspect has been taken into custody in connection with this incident," Lopez said carefully. "No charges have been filed yet." The fire engines arrived like a cavalry charge, 3 massive red trucks with lights flashing and sirens wailing. They parked in a semicircle around the gate, and firefighters started jumping out with an efficiency that spoke to years of training. One of them, a tall black man with a chief's insignia on his helmet, walked straight to Tom. "You weren't kidding," he said, looking at the chain and lock. "Mike, meet the worst HOA president in Arizona," Tom replied, gesturing toward the police cruiser. Fire Chief Chen studied the gate setup for about 10 seconds before turning to his crew. "Get the spreaders and cutters. I want this gate open in 5 minutes, and I want documentation, photos, video, everything. We're going to bury this HOA in citations." A firefighter, I assumed, was the fire marshal, based on his different uniform markings, was already walking the perimeter with a clipboard and camera, photographing everything. He was muttering to himself, and I caught snippets. Egress violation, life safety hazard, locked exit, criminal negligence. The hydraulic rescue tools came out. Massive pieces of equipment that could tear apart a car in seconds. The chain and lock didn't stand a chance. With a grinding screech of metal on metal and a loud crack, the lock broke and the chain fell away. A cheer went up from the residents trapped inside. "Gates open," one of the firefighters called out. But Chief Chen held up his hand. "Nobody moves yet. Fire Marshal needs to complete his inspection." The Fire Marshal, whose name tag read Mitchell, was still documenting violations. He had moved on to the secondary gate, which was still locked, and I could see him shaking his head and making notes. "Chief, I've got probably 20 violations here, maybe more," Mitchell called out. "Both gates locked, no emergency release mechanism, no Knox box for emergency access, inadequate signage, obstructed fire lane access near the south entrance, and that's just off the top of my head." "Document all of it," Chen replied. "I want a full report on my desk by end of day. And I want notices of violation issued to the HOA, the management company if there is one, and every board member who voted for this." Jennifer, the reporter, was recording all of this, her cameraman working overtime to capture every angle. This was turning into a bigger story than a simple HOA dispute. Sergeant Lopez had walked over to confer with Chief Chen, and I could see them discussing something serious. Tom drifted closer to listen, and I followed. "We can charge her with false imprisonment, creating a public hazard, maybe reckless endangerment," Lopez was saying, "but the DA is going to want to know if anyone was actually hurt." "Mrs. Albertson missed her chemo appointment," I interjected. "That's harm." "And I lost a 6-figure contract," Jerry added, having followed us over. "That's quantifiable damage." Lopez nodded slowly. "Okay, that helps. What about the rest of the board?" "The suspect claims they voted to approve this action." "We have records," Chief Chen said. "The HOA has to file certain documents with the county. We can subpoena their meeting minutes." Tom was looking at something on his phone, and his expression had gone from angry to absolutely furious. "You guys need to see this." He turned his phone around, showing a Facebook post from the Meadowbrook Commons HOA official page, posted at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. "Emergency board meeting results. By unanimous vote, the board has approved enhanced security measures to ensure community compliance with all CC&R provisions. Effective immediately, access control protocols will be implemented. All residents must report to the HOA office to sign updated compliance agreements before vehicular egress will be permitted. This is for your safety and the protection of property values. Thank you for your cooperation." Patricia Henderson, HOA president, she posted about it publicly, Tom said. "She announced she was going to imprison people, and then she did it." Sergeant Lopez took a screenshot of the post. "That's premeditation. That helps us a lot." The fire marshal had finished with the second gate and was walking back. "Chief, we need to open the north gate too. And I'm recommending we red tag the entire HOA office and common facilities until they can prove they're in compliance with fire code. Based on what I'm seeing here, I don't trust anything they've done." "Do it," Chen said. Another fire crew moved to the north gate with their hydraulic tools, and soon we had 2 open gates and a lot of very relieved residents. But Chief Chen wasn't done. "I need everyone to stay put for just a few more minutes," he announced, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Fire Marshal Mitchell needs to get statements from residents about how long you were detained and if anyone suffered specific harm due to being unable to leave." Mitchell moved through the crowd with his clipboard, taking names and contact information. When he got to Mrs. Albertson, he spent extra time with her, getting details about her missed appointment and her doctor's information. Sarah was next, explaining the impact on the emergency room when a nurse doesn't show up for a shift. "We're already understaffed," she said. "Every person matters. If someone came in with a major trauma, and we were short a nurse because I was locked in here, that's a direct line from this woman's actions to patient harm." Marcus detailed his construction site situation. Jerry talked about his financial losses, and on and on. By the time Mitchell was done, he had statements from at least 30 residents detailing specific, quantifiable harm. I gave my statement too, explaining the lost client meeting and probable loss of contract. It felt petty compared to cancer appointments and emergency room staffing, but Mitchell assured me it all mattered. Every single piece of harm, no matter how small it seems to you, builds the case, he said. This isn't just about one person being inconvenienced. This is about a pattern of reckless behavior that put an entire community at risk. Jennifer, the reporter, was still working the scene, and I noticed she had cornered some of the other board members who had shown up. Vice President Sharon Keller had arrived, looking horrified at what she was seeing. I didn't know she was actually going to do this, Sharon was saying, loud enough for several of us to hear. The meeting last night, we talked about requiring new compliance forms, but I thought we were just going to mail them out. I had no idea Patricia was planning to lock the gates. I would never have voted for that. But you did vote for it, Jennifer pressed. I voted for requiring new compliance agreements, Sharon said, her voice rising defensively. Not for holding people hostage, that's insane. Sergeant Lopez was suddenly very interested in that conversation. Madam, I'm going to need you to come with me. We need a formal statement about exactly what was discussed and voted on at that meeting. Sharon went pale. Am I being arrested? Not at this time, but you may want to contact a lawyer, Lopez replied. If you participated in planning this action, you could be facing charges. I want to cooperate, Sharon said quickly. I'll tell you everything. Patricia has been getting more and more extreme over the past 6 months, and some of us on the board have been worried, but we didn't think she'd actually do something like this. 2 more board members appeared, both looking equally panicked. Treasurer David Walsh and Secretary Linda Morrison, no relation to Tom. They were apparently married to each other, which I had not known, and they were having a whispered but heated argument as they approached. I told you we should have resigned, Linda was hissing at David. I told you she was going too far. Lopez intercepted them too, and soon we had 3 board members giving statements to police while Patricia sat in. The cruiser, her smug expression finally starting to crack as she watched her colleagues turn on her. Chief Chen approached Tom and me. You 2 have been helpful. I appreciate the call, Tom. This could have turned into a real disaster. What happens now? I asked. Fire Marshal is going to issue citations and fines to the HOA, Chen explained. The fees for emergency response will be substantial. We had to dispatch 3 engine companies and multiple personnel. That's going to run into tens of thousands of dollars, plus the cost of replacing the locks and repairing any damage to the gates. The HOA has to pay for that, Tom asked. Every penny, Chen confirmed, and that's on top of whatever fines we issue for the fire code violations. Plus, I'm recommending to the city attorney that we pursue criminal charges for creating a public hazard. What happened here today could have killed people. As if to emphasize his point, an ambulance came screaming up to the gate, lights and sirens going full blast. The paramedics looked confused when they saw the gate was already open and everyone was just standing around. We got a call about a medical emergency at this location, one of them said. Mrs. Albertson raised her hand weakly. I think that might have been my daughter. She was worried when I called her about missing my appointment. The paramedics checked her over anyway, taking her blood pressure and asking questions about her condition. They decided to transport her to the hospital for her treatment, and I watched the ambulance pull away with a sinking feeling. That was going to be another bill the HOA would be responsible for, and more importantly, more evidence of harm caused by Patricia's insane power trip. The crowd was finally starting to disperse. People were getting back in their cars and leaving for their various appointments and obligations, though most of them were hours late now. I had nowhere to be anymore, my meeting long since canceled, so I stuck around to watch the aftermath unfold. More board members were arriving, and the panic was palpable. Board member Richard Chen, no relation to the fire chief, showed up demanding to know what was happening. When Sergeant Lopez explained that Patricia had been arrested and the HOA was facing both criminal and civil liability, he went white as a sheet. But we have insurance for this kind of thing, he said. Not if it's a criminal act, Tom interjected. HOA insurance doesn't cover intentional criminal behavior. You're all personally liable. That caused a fresh wave of panic. Linda Morrison burst into tears. David Walsh pulled out his phone and started calling lawyers. Sharon Keller sat down on the curb and put her head in her hands. Another board member, Cynthia Torres, arrived and immediately started screaming at Lopez to release Patricia. This is a civil matter. You have no right to arrest her for enforcing our community rules. Madam, she committed multiple felonies, Lopez replied calmly. False imprisonment is a Class 6 felony in Arizona. Reckless endangerment is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Creating a public hazard is a Class 6 felony. Your president is looking at serious jail time. Cynthia's face went from red to purple. This is harassment. We're going to sue everyone involved. The city, the police, the fire department, all of you. Chief Chen just smiled. You're welcome to try. But I'd suggest you spend your money on a good criminal defense attorney instead of a civil lawyer, because you're all going to need one. The fire marshal was placing official notices on the HOA office door, which was located just inside the main gate in a small building that also housed the community pool equipment. Big red tags that declared the building closed until violations were corrected. You can't do that, Cynthia shrieked. That's our office. It's a public safety hazard. Mitchell replied without looking up from his paperwork. Multiple code violations, no proper egress signage, fire extinguishers are expired, no emergency lighting, and the electrical panel is blocked by file cabinets. This building doesn't get used by anyone until all of that is fixed and I personally re-inspect it. I was starting to enjoy this. Maybe that made me petty, but after being held prisoner in my own neighborhood and losing a major client, watching the HOA board members spiral into panic was deeply satisfying. Tom was talking to Chief Chen about the technical details of the violations, and I caught bits of their conversation about how the gates should have had emergency release mechanisms that worked from both sides, how there should have been Knox boxes installed so emergency services could access the community even if the gates were closed, and how the whole setup was a disaster waiting to happen. I'm surprised you haven't had a serious incident before now, Chen was saying. What if there had been a structure fire? We couldn't have gotten our engines in and residents couldn't have evacuated. You'd be looking at deaths. Plural. Richard Chen, the board member, overheard this and looked like he was going to be sick. We just wanted people to follow the rules about lawn maintenance and paint colors, he said weakly. How did it turn into this? You put Patricia Henderson in charge, that's how, Tom said bluntly. Anyone who was paying attention could see she was on a power trip from day one. She seemed so organized, Richard protested. She had all these plans for improving property values and making the community more prestigious. She's a tyrant, I said, and you enabled her. More police cars were arriving, and I recognized detectives by their plain clothes and badges on belts. This was escalating beyond a simple arrest. Sergeant Lopez conferred with them, handing over her notes and the statements from the fire marshal. One of the detectives, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached the cluster of board members. I'm Detective Barnes. I need all of you to stay available for questioning. We're investigating this as a conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. That word, conspiracy, hit the board members like a physical blow. Conspiracy charges meant everyone who participated in the planning could be held criminally liable, not just Patricia. Sharon started crying. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was going to actually lock people in. Then you should have asked questions when she proposed enhanced security measures, Detective Barnes replied. You're on a board of directors. You have a fiduciary responsibility to the homeowners. That includes not committing crimes against them. The local news now had two vans on scene, Channel 12 and Channel 3. The reporters were interviewing anyone who would talk, and residents were not holding back. I heard Jerry Patterson giving a blistering interview about HOA overreach and the need for legislative reform. Sarah was talking about public safety and emergency preparedness. Even quiet Mr. Henderson from the end of my street was on camera talking about how the HOA had fined him $300 for having his garbage cans visible from the street for more than 2 hours. My phone rang. It was my wife Olivia calling from her office downtown. She's a corporate attorney, and I had texted her earlier about the situation. Are you okay? She asked immediately. Yeah, I'm fine. Gates open now. Fire department cut the locks. I'm watching you on the news right now, she said. Well, not you specifically, but the whole thing. It's all over social media. There's a video of them cutting the lock that's already got like 2 million views on TikTok. Seriously? Seriously, this is going viral. HOA Horror Stories is trending on Twitter. You guys are famous, I groaned. Great. That's exactly what I wanted today. Have they arrested anyone besides the president? Olivia asked. Not yet, but the detective is talking about conspiracy charges for the whole board. Good. As an attorney, I can tell you they're all screwed. You can't hold people prisoner no matter what your HOA documents say. CC&Rs are subordinate to state and federal law. Any first-year law student knows that. We talked for a few more minutes, and Olivia promised to come home early so we could discuss whether we wanted to be part of any potential class action lawsuit against the HOA. Given that I had lost a significant client because of this, I was definitely interested. After I hung up, Tom came over looking grim. Fire Marshal found something else, he said quietly. What? The locks Patricia used, they're not just commercial grade. They're the kind used in high-security applications. She had to special order them. He found the receipt in her car, dated 3 weeks ago. So she planned this well in advance, I said. At least 3 weeks, yeah. This wasn't some panic decision at a board meeting. She's been working up to this for a while. That information made its way to Detective Barnes, who immediately got on his phone. I heard him talking to someone about search warrants for Patricia's home and the HOA office computers. The day was getting hot. It was Arizona in late May, and the temperature was climbing past 90 degrees. The firefighters were packing up their equipment, their work done, but Chief Chen and Fire Marshal Mitchell were still on scene, continuing their documentation. The amount of paperwork being generated was staggering. Another car pulled up, and a man in an expensive suit got out, looking harried. He made a beeline for the cluster of board members. I'm Robert Harrison, attorney for the Meadowbrook Commons HOA, he announced. Nobody says anything else to the police without me present. Detective Barnes looked amused. Little late for that, counselor. We've already got statements from multiple board members. Harrison's face fell. Who talked? Sharon, David, Linda, and Richard all raised their hands, like guilty schoolchildren. Unbelievable, Harrison muttered. Okay, from this point forward, nobody says another word. That includes you, Cynthia. Cynthia, who had been about to launch into another tirade, snapped her mouth shut. Harrison turned to Detective Barnes. I'm advising all my clients to invoke their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination. That's their right, Barnes agreed. But they've already given voluntary statements, and those statements are admissible, especially since we Mirandized them before taking the statements. Harrison looked like he wanted to argue but knew he couldn't. Instead, he turned to the board members. All of you, come with me. We need to talk now. They scurried after him like ducklings following their mother, leaving just the police, firefighters, reporters, and a few curious residents like me and Tom still hanging around. This is going to be a mess, Tom observed. Think they'll all go to jail, I asked. Patricia probably will. The others might get plea deals if they cooperate and testify against her. Depends on what the DA wants to do. A crime scene van pulled up, and technicians got out with cameras and evidence collection kits. They were going to process the locks and chains as evidence, document the scene, photograph everything. This was being treated as a serious criminal investigation, not just an HOA dispute that got out of hand. Jennifer from Channel 12 approached me, microphone in hand. Sir, were you one of the residents trapped inside? I hesitated, but figured why not. The cat was already out of the bag. Yeah, I was the first car at the gate this morning. Can you tell us what happened? I gave her a condensed version of events, careful not to editorialize too much. Just facts. I tried to leave for a client meeting, found the gate locked. Patricia refused to open it. Police were called. Fire marshal was called. Locks were cut. How do you feel about your HOA president being arrested? Jennifer asked. I think she made a series of catastrophically bad decisions that put people's lives and livelihoods at risk, I said carefully. I'm glad the authorities took it seriously. Will you be taking legal action against the HOA? My wife and I are discussing our options, I replied. The interview wrapped up and I extricated myself before she could ask more questions. Tom had already disappeared, probably to talk more with Chief Chen about the technical fire code violations. By noon, just as the subject line had promised, the gates were not only open, but the locks had been completely removed. Fire Marshal Mitchell had ordered them taken as evidence, and the gates now stood open with no way to close them until new, code-compliant locks could be installed. What's to stop someone from just driving in now? One resident asked nervously. Nothing, Mitchell replied. But that's better than the alternative of not being able to get out. You want security. You install proper gates with emergency releases and Knox boxes. Until then, this stays open. I finally got in my car and drove out of the neighborhood, feeling a strange sense of freedom despite the fact that I lived here and would be coming back in a few hours. The psychological impact of being locked in had been more profound than I wanted to admit. My phone was blowing up with messages from neighbors, friends who had seen the news, and even a few reporters looking for interviews. I ignored most of them and drove to a coffee shop in Old Town Scottsdale, needing to be somewhere that wasn't Meadowbrook Commons for a while. While I sat there drinking an overpriced latte, I scrolled through social media and was shocked at how big this story had gotten. Whole lockdown was trending. There were memes. Someone had created a fake movie poster called The Great HOA Prison Break of 2026. The video of the fire department cutting the lock had been viewed over 5 million times, but there were also serious discussions happening. Legislators were commenting on Twitter about the need for HOA reform. Consumer advocates were calling for investigations into HOA abuses statewide. Legal experts were weighing in on the criminal charges Patricia was likely facing. One thread caught my attention. It was from a reporter at the Arizona Republic who had dug into Meadowbrook Commons HOA records. Apparently, Patricia had been issuing fines and violations at a rate 3 times higher than the previous board administration. The HOA's legal fees had quadrupled in the past year, almost all of it related to pursuing violations against homeowners. And most damningly, Patricia's husband owned a property management company that was bidding to take over management of Meadowbrook Commons, which would represent a significant financial conflict of interest. I screenshot that thread and sent it to Detective Barnes's email, which I had gotten from one of his business cards that was being passed around. If there was financial motivation behind Patricia's reign of terror, that would be important for the investigation. My phone rang again, this time a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Keith Jameson?" a woman's voice asked, speaking. "This is Dana Morrison from the Arizona Attorney General's Office, Consumer Protection Division. We're investigating the incident at Meadowbrook Commons this morning. I understand you were one of the residents who was detained?" "That's right. Would you be willing to give a statement for our investigation? We're looking at potential violations of consumer protection laws, abuse of fiduciary duty, and several other issues related to HOA governance." I agreed immediately and set up an appointment for later that week. The AG's office getting involved meant this was escalating beyond just criminal charges against Patricia and the board. The state was taking an interest in the broader issues of HOA accountability and oversight. By the time I got home that afternoon, Olivia was already there, laptop open on the kitchen's table with legal documents scattered around. "I've been researching," she said without preamble. "The HOA is in serious trouble, not just criminally but civilly. Every single resident who was detained has grounds for a false imprisonment lawsuit. Everyone who suffered quantifiable damages has grounds for a negligence claim. And everyone in the community has grounds to sue for breach of fiduciary duty." "How much are we talking?" I asked. "Potentially millions. Depends on how many people join a class action and what damages they can prove. But the HOA's insurance isn't going to cover this because it was an intentional act, so it comes out of the HOA's operating funds and reserves. Which means it comes out of our dues and assessments," I said, seeing the problem. "Exactly. We'd be suing ourselves essentially, or at least suing the organization we're required to be members of, which uses our money." It was a mess, the kind of legal nightmare that would take years to untangle. That evening, there was an emergency meeting called by the remaining board members who hadn't been arrested. It was held at the community pool since the office was red-tagged, and about 100 angry residents showed up. Sharon Keller, looking like she hadn't slept in days, stood at the front and addressed the crowd. "First, I want to apologize on behalf of the board for what happened this morning. It was unacceptable, illegal, and never should have occurred." "You think?" someone shouted from the back. Flinched the judge but continued. "Patricia Henderson has been removed as president and from the board entirely. She is also being expelled from the HOA and will be required to sell her home and leave the community." "Can you even do that?" someone asked. The HOA's attorney, Robert Harrison, stepped forward. The CC&Rs allow for removal of a board member or homeowner for conduct that brings discredit to the community or violates community standards. What Ms. Henderson did certainly qualifies. What about the rest of you? Jerry Patterson demanded. You all voted for this. We voted for requiring new compliance agreements, David Walsh said defensively, not for locking the gates. Patricia presented it as a way to ensure everyone signed the new documents. We didn't realize she meant to physically trap people. That's a lie. Someone called out. I turned and saw it was Marcus Webb, the construction foreman. I got a copy of the meeting minutes from the county records. Patricia specifically said she was going to secure both gates to ensure compliance. You all knew. Sharon burst into tears again. David and Linda looked at each other in panic. Richard Chen stared at his shoes. We need new leadership, Tom said, standing up. The entire board needs to resign, and we need an emergency election. There was a chorus of agreement from the crowd. If we all resign, there's no board to run the HOA, Linda protested. Then we appoint an interim board from volunteers here tonight, Tom replied. This isn't complicated. What's complicated is continuing to trust people who thought locking us in our homes was acceptable. The meeting devolved into chaos after that, with multiple people shouting at once. Eventually, Robert Harrison managed to restore some order and facilitated the resignation of all remaining board members and the appointment of an interim board, with Tom as interim president. One of Tom's first acts was to motion for an immediate vote to pursue criminal complaints against Patricia Henderson personally for her actions, separate from any board liability. The vote was unanimous. Over the next few days, more information came out. The search warrant executed on Patricia's home had turned up documents showing she had been planning the gate lockdown for over a month. She had consulted with a security company about the locks, researched legal precedents for HOA enforcement actions, and had even drafted a press release to send out after the fact, portraying herself as a tough but necessary leader who was willing to make hard decisions to protect property values. The search of the HOA office computers revealed that Patricia had been embezzling funds, small amounts at first but escalating over time. She had created fake vendor invoices and paid them to accounts she controlled. The total was estimated at over $50,000. That last revelation meant additional charges, embezzlement, wire fraud, possibly money laundering depending on how she had moved the money around. Patricia was looking at serious federal prison time, not just state charges. The other board members who had been present at the meeting where the lockdown was approved were offered plea deals. Sharon, David, Linda, and Richard all agreed to testify against Patricia in exchange for reduced charges, probation, and resignation from the board. Cynthia Torres, who had been the most vocally supportive of Patricia's actions, refused the plea deal and was charged as a co-conspirator. The civil lawsuits started rolling in. Mrs. Albertson's family filed first, seeking damages for emotional distress and the medical complications from her missed chemotherapy appointment. Sarah filed on behalf of the hospital, which had to pay overtime to cover her shift. Jerry filed for his lost financial contracts. Marcus filed for the wages he had to pay his crew while they waited. I filed for my lost client contract. In total, over 70 homeowners filed individual lawsuits, and a class action was organized for general damages. The total claimed damages exceeded $12 million. The HOA's insurance company sent a letter denying coverage, as Olivia had predicted. The HOA's operating account had about $200,000 in it, and the reserve fund had another $500,000. Not even close to enough to cover the potential liability, which meant the HOA would likely have to declare bankruptcy, which meant the community would be in legal limbo, which meant property values would tank, which meant everyone lost. It was a disaster of epic proportions, all because one woman on a power trip decided that her authority was more important than people's freedom and safety. The criminal trial for Patricia Henderson began 6 months later. I was called to testify about the events of that morning, as were dozens of other residents. The prosecution built a damning case, showing the premeditation, the planning, the deliberate choice to use locks that couldn't be easily broken, and the callous disregard for the harm she was causing. Patricia's defense attorney tried to argue that she genuinely believed she had the authority under the CC&Rs to enforce compliance in this manner, but the prosecution brought in legal experts who testified that no HOA agreement could override state and federal law regarding false imprisonment. The embezzlement charges were almost an afterthought by the time they were presented, but they sealed Patricia's fate. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: false imprisonment, reckless endangerment, creating a public hazard, embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The judge, a stern woman named Margaret Feldman, did not mince words at sentencing. "Mrs. Henderson, you were entrusted with a position of leadership in your community, and you abused that trust in the most egregious manner possible. You held your neighbors prisoner. You endangered lives. You stole money. And through it all, you showed no remorse, no understanding of the harm you caused, and no accountability for your actions." The court sentences you to 12 years in state prison on the false imprisonment and related charges, to run consecutively with an 8-year federal sentence for the fraud charges. You will serve a total of 20 years, with eligibility for parole after serving 85% of your sentence. Patricia's face went white. She had clearly expected probation, maybe a few months in county jail at worst. 20 years meant she would be almost 70 when she got out. Cynthia Torres, who had refused the plea deal, got 6 years for her role in the conspiracy. The other board members who had cooperated got probation and community service, though their legal fees had bankrupted most of them. The civil cases took longer to resolve. The HOA did declare bankruptcy, and the assets were liquidated. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Commons took a financial hit, either directly through reduced property values or through special assessments to cover legal fees and damages that couldn't be discharged in bankruptcy. My lawsuit for the lost client contract, settled for $40,000, paid out over 3 years from a fund established by the bankruptcy court. It didn't fully cover what I had lost, but it was something. Mrs. Albertson's family received the largest settlement, over $200,000, though she passed away before seeing most of it. Her cancer had progressed during the chaos, and while the missed chemotherapy appointment wasn't the direct cause, her family argued it had contributed to her decline. That broke my heart more than anything else about this whole disaster. The state legislature, pressured by the media attention and public outcry, passed new laws regulating HOA conduct. HOAs were now required to have independent oversight, couldn't impose fines above a certain amount without a hearing process, and faced criminal liability for violations of residents' civil rights. It was called the Meadowbrook Commons Act, and while it wouldn't bring back Mrs. Albertson or undo the harm that had been done, it might prevent future HOAs from going down the same path. Tom served as HOA president for 2 years, overseeing the bankruptcy proceedings and the transition to a new management structure. He implemented common-sense policies focused on actual community maintenance rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. Paint color violations went away. Parking enforcement became reasonable. The community started to feel like a neighborhood again rather than a prison. I stayed in Meadowbrook Commons, though Olivia and I seriously considered moving. Ultimately, we decided that running away wouldn't solve anything, and we wanted to be part of rebuilding the community into something better. On the 1-year anniversary of the lockdown, the local news did a follow-up story. They interviewed me, Tom, Sarah, and several other residents who had been directly impacted. We talked about the lessons learned, the changes that had been made, and the ongoing healing process. "Do you think this could happen in other communities?" Jennifer asked me during my interview. "Absolutely," I said. HOAs have tremendous power over people's lives, and when that power isn't checked, when there's no oversight or accountability, it can lead to abuses. What Patricia did was extreme, but there are versions of this happening in communities all over the country. People getting fined into bankruptcy over lawn violations, homes being foreclosed over unpaid dues, arbitrary rules being enforced selectively. The Meadowbrook Commons Act is a start, but we need more reform. The interview aired that night, and I got dozens of messages from people in other states dealing with their own HOA nightmares. I had become an inadvertent advocate for HOA reform testifying before legislative committees and speaking at speaky community forums about the need for better governance and oversight. It wasn't how I had planned to spend my time, but sometimes life pushes you into unexpected roles. I had been a software developer who just wanted to get to a client meeting. Instead, I became the face of a movement to rein in out-of-control homeowners associations. 3 years after the incident, I was invited to speak at a national conference on community association management. I stood in front of an audience of HOA board members, property managers, and attorneys, and I told them the story of what happened that Tuesday morning in May. The gates were locked by noon, I concluded, referencing the viral headline that had made us famous. But the damage lasted years. It cost one woman her life, cost dozens of people their financial security, and cost an entire community its peace of mind. All because one person believed that rules were more important than people, and a board of directors didn't have the courage to stop her. Don't let that happen in your communities. Question authority, even your own. Put people first. And never, ever think that your HOA documents give you the right to violate someone's basic human rights. The applause was polite but subdued. I had made people uncomfortable, which was exactly my intention. Comfortable people don't change systems. Afterward, several attendees approached me with their own stories of HOA overreach, of board members who had gone too far, of communities torn apart by power struggles and petty enforcement. It was depressing how common these stories were, but also encouraging that people were starting to push back. I drove home that night thinking about Mrs. Albertson, about her tears as she stood at that locked gate, explaining that she had cancer and needed to get to her appointment. I thought about Patricia Henderson sitting in a prison cell serving 20 years for what she probably still believed was just enforcing community standards. I thought about all the people whose lives had been upended by one morning of madness, and I thought about the lesson in all of it, the one I tried to communicate wherever I spoke. Power without accountability becomes tyranny, no matter how small the domain. An HOA president ruling over a 200-home community can do just as much harm in her own way as any dictator. The scale is different, but the principle is the same. When I pulled into Meadowbrook Commons that night, the gates stood open as they always did now. The old automatic system had been replaced with a simple gate that residents could close at night if they wanted, but that had multiple emergency release mechanisms and Knox boxes installed per fire code. It was safer, more functional, and a daily reminder of what we had been through. I parked in my driveway where my car could sit overnight without anyone issuing a violation notice, and walked into my house where Olivia was cooking dinner. Normal, boring, suburban life, and I was grateful for every minute of it. The HOA still existed because legally it had to, but it was a shadow of its former self, focused on maintaining common areas and handling the practical necessities of running a planned community. No more violation patrols, no more petty fines, no more harassment over paint colors and lawn ornaments. Tom stepped down as president after his 2-year term, and a rotation of reasonable people had served since. The board meetings were sparsely attended now, which Tom said was actually a good sign. When people aren't showing up to complain, it means we're probably doing our jobs right, he told me. I attended occasionally, more to stay informed than because I expected drama. The most controversial issue in recent memory had been whether to replace the community pool, fence with vinyl or powder-coated steel. After robust discussion, they went with the steel. Democracy in action. Sarah still lived in the community, still worked at the hospital, and we had become friends through the whole ordeal. She organized an annual neighborhood barbecue on the anniversary of the lockdown, which we called Gate Freedom Day, with only partial irony. It was a way to remember what had happened, honor Mrs. Albertson's memory, and celebrate how far we had come. Marcus Webb had actually benefited from the whole experience in a strange way. His construction company had been hired to do some of the repairs and renovations required by the fire marshal's citations, and he did such good work that he ended up with contracts from several other HOAs that were upgrading their own safety systems to avoid Meadowbrook's fate. He joked that he should send Patricia a thank you card, but I don't think he ever actually did. Jerry Patterson moved away. The stress of the whole situation, combined with the financial losses, had been too much. Last I heard, He was living in a condo in Phoenix with no HOA, just a simple building management company that handled the basics. I didn't blame him for leaving. As for me, I rebuilt my client base, though it took time. The viral fame had actually helped in a weird way, as some companies wanted to work with that guy who fought the HOA. I learned to leverage the experience in networking situations, turning a disaster into a story that made me memorable. But the real impact was harder to quantify. I looked at authority differently now, questioned rules that didn't make sense, spoke up when I saw people abusing power in small ways. I joined the board of a local nonprofit that advocated for tenant rights and homeowner protections. I voted in every election, even the boring ones for school board and county supervisor, because I had learned that local government mattered. Olivia said the experience had changed me, made me more engaged and less willing to just go along with things. She meant it as a compliment, I think, though it sometimes made me harder to live with. I had opinions now about things I would have previously ignored. The weirdest part was the occasional recognition. Even 3 years later, someone would see me at the grocery store or a restaurant and say, "Hey, weren't you in that HOA thing?" The video of the fire department cutting the lock still circulated on social media whenever there was a news story about HOA abuses, which happened depressingly often. I had become a symbol, which was uncomfortable but also felt like a responsibility. If people knew my face and my story, I could use that platform to push for change. So I kept speaking, kept testifying, kept telling anyone who would listen that HOAs needed reform and oversight. 5 years after the incident, I was invited to give a TED Talk. Standing on that red circle in front of cameras and a live audience, I told the story one more time. But I also talked about the broader issues of how we organize communities, how we balance individual freedom with collective responsibility, and how we prevent the people we give power from abusing it. The talk went viral, which was both gratifying and exhausting. My email inbox filled with thousands of messages from people sharing their own HOA horror stories, asking for advice, thanking me for speaking out. I couldn't respond to all of them, but I read every single one. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure. Elderly people losing their homes over a few $100s in disputed fines. Families being harassed for having the wrong color mailbox. Veterans being told they couldn't fly the American flag. Disabled residents being denied reasonable accommodations. The list went on and on. But there were also stories of reform, of communities standing up to bad boards, of state legislatures passing new protections, of courts ruling in favor of homeowners against overreaching associations. Change was happening, slowly but steadily. I like to think that what happened at Meadowbrook Commons that Tuesday morning contributed to that change. That Mrs. Albertson's tears at the locked gate, that the image of fire department cutting through chains, that the sight of an HOA president being led away in handcuffs, that all of it made people pay attention to an issue that had been ignored for too long. Patricia Henderson is still in prison. She'll be eligible for parole in 2039 when she's 68 years old. I don't think about her often, but when I do, I wonder if she ever understood what she did wrong. If she ever grasped that her obsession with rules and compliance and property values led directly to one woman's death and the destruction of an entire community. Probably not. People like Patricia rarely achieve that kind of self-awareness. In her mind, she was probably still the hero, the one willing to make tough decisions while everyone else was too weak or too selfish to do what was necessary. But she was wrong. Leadership isn't about control or enforcement or making people afraid to step out of line. It's about service, about making the community better for everyone, about balancing different needs and finding solutions that work. Patricia never understood that, and it cost her everything. As for Meadowbrook Commons, we survived. We're not the prestigious, perfectly manicured showplace that Patricia envisioned. Some lawns are a little scraggly, some houses have unconventional paint colors, and you can see garbage cans in driveways sometimes. But it's a community, a real one, where people know their neighbors and help each other and don't live in fear of petty tyrants with clipboards. Where kids play in the streets and people walk their dogs and the gates stand open, always open, welcoming rather than imprisoning. The Tuesday morning in May started out as the worst day of my life. I was locked in my own neighborhood. I lost a major client, and I watched an elderly woman cry because she couldn't get to her cancer treatment. But it also became the catalyst for the most important work I've ever done, for friendships I never would have made, for changes in law that will protect millions of people, and for a community that learned to be better than its worst moment. The gates were unlocked by noon, just like the headline said, but the real opening, the one that mattered, took much longer. It's still happening, in small ways, every day. Every time someone questions an unreasonable rule, every time a board member chooses service over power, every time a community comes together instead of tearing apart. That's the real story. Not about locks and chains and arrests, though those happened, but about how a crisis can crack something open, how it can reveal what's broken and create space to build something better, about how ordinary people in an ordinary neighborhood can stand up to injustice, even when it comes from their own homeowners association. I'm still Keith Jameson, still a software developer, still living in Meadowbrook Commons in Scottsdale, Arizona. But I'm also someone who learned that you can't ignore power when it's abused, that silence enables tyranny, and that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to accept the unacceptable, even when it's just your HOA president being unreasonable at a gate. The story ended with arrests and trials and reforms and change. But it started with one simple act, calling for help when something was wrong. Everything else followed from that. And that's a lesson worth remembering, whether you're dealing with an HOA or any other authority that forgets it's supposed to serve rather than rule. Speak up, call for help. Refuse to accept being locked in, literally or figuratively. The gates are open now. They'll stay that way. We'll make sure of it.